Tonight we're going to give you guys a little brief introduction into what we're calling the FORCE Committee, the FirstNet Oklahoma Regional Panhandle Coordination Effort. I think everybody here is probably somewhat familiar with the FirstNet board agenda that Congress came out with here recently. We've got William Hadala here with us. He's Tri-County's project manager for the microwave backbone system we're putting in and radio system we're putting in over there. So this time I'll turn it over to William, and if you guys have any questions for either one of us at any time, it's pretty informal. If you want to go get more food, drinks, whatever, don't sit here, just go get them.
Thank you. I'm just going to use this because she's recording. I don't want it to pick up. So tonight is just really going to educate you guys about what FirstNet is, the importance of what we're building across the U.S. for public safety, and the significance of today with its date and where FirstNet got born. And most importantly, even though we're kind of out here in Oklahoma and the Panhandle, you guys are actually going to play a really key instrumental role in showing the rest of the nation, especially across rural America, how collaboration can come together with partnerships, and to how to build out this public safety network to help improve the quality of life across the U.S. So September 11th happened, and unfortunately many people lost their lives due to lack of interoperability with public safety communicators. Fire and police couldn't speak together on the same radio. So as a result, a lot of lives were needlessly lost. Rudy Giuliani and others really made the case of why we needed to create an interoperable public safety broadband network. And 10 years ago, that's where this all got birthed. When FirstNet was born, it was born out of the carriers trying to get together to build a public safety broadband network. And for many different reasons, they just weren't successful in getting this thing off the ground. But earlier this year, turn this slide, FirstNet got born out of the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act. On February 22nd, it was signed into legislation. And prior to FirstNet being born through the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act, the D block spectrum of the 700 megahertz was given to certain states to build out their public safety networks, Texas being one of them, New Mexico was another. And for those of you, just to give kind of background, is the 700 megahertz used to be the old digital, or it used to be the old UHF and VHF frequencies. And if you remember a few years ago, there was a real push to go to digital television. Reason being is that they're taking that spectrum to use it for data. And when that finally got taken away, it was auctioned, and the carriers came in and bought the majority of it. And there was a certain block of the spectrum, and I'll show you a slide here in a few moments so you can see how the blocks of spectrum are broken down. But the D block was pulled aside specifically for public safety. But again, the carriers and others had the opportunity to buy this spectrum across the U.S., but nobody did it. So they gave the D block to certain states to build out their networks. They were having a lot of difficulties doing that. People like Ron was on certain committees for interoperability with the FCC. So this was very significant, and so we're finally pushing forward building this public safety broadband network. The public safety broadband network is a network that's going to be built across the U.S. It's supposed to cover 98% of the landmass, not 98% of the population areas. So unlike a lot of these programs that get funded and the big cities get a big chunk of money and then there's nothing really left over for rural America, the tables have sort of turned on this one. But FirstNet right now is kind of still taking a top-down approach. It's a board that was put into place, and they're trying to figure this out from a national level, and that's why Tri-County has stepped up and people as well as Panhandle Telephone that kind of say, no, the local voice needs to be represented to build out this network. It's the only way it's going to be built out, because it needs to be built using existing infrastructure. You can't just build a network out from scratch. It'll never get done. You can go to the next slide. This is basically how spectrum is broken down. You have upper and lower bands of spectrum that allows upload and download as we know it. Within the 700 megahertz, there are various bands like A band, B band, C band, D, E, and so forth. And you can see that, like in the A band, a lot of smaller carriers were able to purchase that spectrum, including Panhandle Telephone. But the majority of it was bought by the big carriers like AT&T and Verizon. On the lower band here, you can see that we have the D block here. This is a 10 megahertz channel. The megahertz basically will dictate how much data can go as far as download and upload. So what they were able to do is take the D block here and the D block here for 20 megahertz, which is quite significant. You can get very fast speeds. FirstNet is LMR, like land mobile radios, historically aren't interoperable, so it's hard for these different radios to communicate together. So the theory is that if you create a public safety broadband network and it's IP, Internet Protocol, or data, you're not only going to be able to have higher quality data transfer speeds, you can use video and voice, and it's also a way to tie in land mobile radio systems. And that's what FirstNet's all about. It's the evolution of the way public safety people communicate with each other. We can see needs for, in some of the bigger cities, digital crime scene investigation, the ability to use video, the ability to have command and control at an incident where you're using video to communicate back and forth. And just the fact that many of you are already using data cards from AT&T and Verizon and other, and coverage is, in many cases, non-existent in many rural areas, which is exciting because there is your local telecom carrier here is building out a network that will help with that. But again, you're kind of at the mercy. You can go on to the next slide. You're still at the mercy of those major carriers. And when I say major carriers, I'm not singling out anyone here from Panhandle Telephone, but the AT&Ts and the Verizons. They really don't care about the quality of service that they're providing to you. So with this 700 megahertz D block and dedicating 20 megahertz of spectrum is a lot. I mean, it's going to be the equivalent of you guys having your own data network out into the field, where it's not going to be maybe 1.5 megabits per second. We're talking extremely fast speeds, and if there's only public safety using the network, you can see speeds anywhere between 10, 20, 30 megabits per second, the ability to give prioritization of service. So if there's a train wreck, you can prioritize more spectrum to that incident and take some of the spectrum away from others that may not be using the system. You can go on to the next slide. Now, how does FirstNet work? It's a 15-member board, and that board includes federal, state, local, and tribal representatives. We have a website for this group, FORCE. FORCE is this group that we've created isn't tri-county. This is about you all. We set this up for first and secondary responders to man this board and to participate on this board. So I think this is important for you to know that. But the FirstNet board was just appointed on August 22nd. And Zach and I were at the APCO show in Minnesota when they were announced. Right now, they're putting their operation processes together as we speak. They're trying to set up an organization. But the next step is that they're going to be issuing an RFP, a request for proposal, to the states, for the states to put together their plans on how this public safety broadband network is going to work in their states. And I'll get into the opt-in and opt-out. States have the ability to opt into this program and to opt out. Part of this program is $134 million, $135 million that's going to be given to each state. And again, that has to be 98% of the land mass, not population areas, which is really interesting again because it goes to the point it's not going to make its way to the major cities. If we stand up as local communities and say these are what our needs are, we're in a position, you are in a position to get access to some of these dollars, or a big chunk of these dollars, to build out these networks across rural America or rural Oklahoma. But we're only going to be able to do that through a public-private partnership, and I'll get into that as well in a few moments. You can go to the next slide. The $135 million per state comes out to $7 billion in seed money to bring this together. A lot of people joke that $7 billion would probably all go to New York City to build out their network. But even with $135 million, that's not going to be enough money to build out this network. So that's why it's very important for existing infrastructure to be used. And that existing infrastructure provided by your utilities, provided by your local exchange carriers, your local telephone companies. And I'll get into that in a few moments as well. The other thing about FirstNet is that, as you probably all know, you have certain vendors that have been selling you products for many, many years. You know, good products. You know, you have the Motorola's, the Harris's, the Alcatel-Lucents, or whatever it may be. But they historically have been selling products that are proprietary only to themselves, and you're really held at their mercy. You can only use this equipment, and if I want to upgrade, I got to get this equipment. If I want to switch from one manufacturer to the other, it's really hard to do. So when FirstNet was created, it was created to be vendor agnostic and using commercially standardized technology to bring this network all together. And the technology that FirstNet is going to be using is a technology many of you probably have seen a lot and heard a lot about, is 4G, LTE technology. It's extremely fast, it's digital, and that's the technology that's going to be used for the FirstNet network. But keeping in mind, it's not going to be just one vendor coming to the table and saying, it's the Motorola public safety broadband network across the US. Rather, the network's going to be based on the needs of the state and the local communities and first responders that need to use it. And the procurement of this technology is going to go through a competitive procurement process. And the other side of this is that this network has to be economically self-sustaining, meaning the government can't just give all this money to build the network. Money has to be made to use the network and sustain itself, unlike a lot of the grant money that the federal government gave across America to build out broadband in rural areas. You know, here's your money, and then all of a sudden it's like, what do you mean I have to pay this back? In this case, somebody's going to have to pay for the spectrum to use it. It'll probably come out of existing dollars for programs, operational costs, and I'll get into this a little bit down the line here as well. The importance of having public-private partnerships in place to economically self-sustain the network. Next slide, please. LTE being used as the technology of choice has been endorsed by the who's who in public safety. The organization was really instrumental in giving birth to FirstNet, was the Association of Public Safety Communication Officers, APCO, and you can kind of see the list here. It's the who's who. And again, you know, most of these type of programs get focused on by the major cities, but this one here, really, we can do a lot to improve the quality of life. First responders can get digital equipment to upgrade existing equipment, get into the new century of, you know, mass communications using digital communications. There's the ability for utilities to upgrade their electrical grids. There's the ability for telecommunication carriers to leverage this network using their backhaul and middle mile to provide broadband to the masses. And if we don't, or if you don't get actively involved in this, and we'll talk about how you can get more actively involved in this, This is going to be another failed program of the government, from the federal side to the state side, because they're going to be telling us what to do, and then we're going to be like the redheaded, stepchild, where most of the stuff isn't coming to where it needs to be, where there's a lack of broadband. And LTE is a technology that could literally solve the broadband problems across the United States in rural America. Really brief here. LTE is a really cool technology because you're able to take all these different Gs. You're able to take, 1 G used to be the basic telephone. Then you had 2G, which was cellular. And then you have 3G, which everyone went to 3G because it was mixing analog with digital. Well, 4G is a technology in LTE that allows you to take all these legacy technologies and bring it all through one technology that creates a digital broadcast in a way that you can use analog and digital as we slowly migrate everyone to the digital world. And unlike a cell phone tower of a traditional cell network where you have a tower, you have a base station, you have a controller, and this is all at the tower, and then it gets communicated back to a radio access network, which goes back to a big telephone operator box on a switch. LTE is much easier, it's sexier when it comes to the technology. You have a core. That core is either hosted locally in a city or somewhere remotely in another city, like in Dallas or Oklahoma City or whatever it may be. And then you basically have your towers, and those towers get deployed all across your city and kind of using a mesh network. This tower broadcasts 5 miles around in a big circle, and you're able to put tower after tower after tower to give your entire coverage area. So LTE is really basic technology. It's not basic, it's advanced, but it's really easy to deploy these networks. And it's consistent of a core and then a backbone. And the backbone is your microwave network, just kind of like fiber optics in the sky, very extremely fast speeds from point A to point B, broadcasting data back and forth, and it goes to your last mile, which is what you would all use in the field to get data connectivity, kind of like your data cards that are in your laptops. Next slide, please. States have the ability to opt in or opt out. Well, what does that mean? A state could say, I don't want any part of this. I believe in the 10th Amendment, which is states' rights to not be told what the federal government wants me to do. Or I could just go with the bandwagon and say, you know what, my state is in, I believe in this, public safety is important, and I want to build this network. Well, here's the catch. Whether a state opts in or they opt out, they still have to create a plan to make this happen. So it's not like one of these Washington programs where it might happen, it's going to happen. So if a state says, I want to opt out, they still have to show that they have the ability to build out their own network. And if they don't have the ability to build their own network, well, they can't opt out, they have to opt in, and then it gets into a whole, I don't want to get into all this. But the point being is that if a state opts in, they need to use their core and their backbone. So backbone's all that microwave that they have across the strait, or fiber optics, or whatever it may be. And then they have to have the ability to tap into the state's regional wide area network. And the RAN is radio access network that communicates to the tower. Or if a state opts out, they still have to use the backbone and the core. Let's make sure I got this right. So there's the backbone and the core, so the state will pay for the backbone and the core, but then what you're going to have are these regional wide area networks, which are comprised of like local exchange carriers plug into the core to provide the service to local law enforcement that gets communicated out to the towers through the radio access network. And this is as technical as I'm going to get in this whole presentation, so forgive me if I went too fast, but I'd be more than happy to answer your questions one-on-one. Next slide, please. Some of the reasons why FirstNet is being built in the first place is the limitations of public safety communication today. And again, I'm not singling out anyone here with Panhandle telephone. It's there. I think you guys are progressive in what you're doing. You're solving many of the problems that exist across rural America. So when we talk about current operators, as far as current carriers, the carriers have had the opportunity to build this network over the last 10 years, and they just haven't. And some of the reasons why FirstNet is being built is that current land mobile radios, the systems you guys are using right now, use narrowband. It's not very good for bandwidth intensive data application transfer. And they're not good they're not very interoperable. You can't put a lot of data on them. They're using a lot of proprietary technology. You've got P25, you've got Moto Turbo. I mean, it's crazy, especially since we all know we're going into a world where it's going to be more voice over IP, more video. Everything's going to eventually move to that smartphone device or application or computer you have into the car. So LMR systems have limited capacity to use for your needs in emergency situations, and everyone knows that. You know, even if the carriers did build this network, you still have to deal with the issue of congested license and spectrum and traffic when an emergency happens. You know, there's a statistic that says something along the lines that 90% of cell towers so the capacity of cell towers, so if you have 100% of cell tower capacity, 90% of that tower's capacity are used by 10% of the total subscriber base. And that's why in places where there is an emergency and you try to make your phone call, it doesn't work. So public safety and utilities, which are considered secondary users, are now in a position that they need to build their own networks. But why build a network from scratch when you can use existing towers that maybe the utility has, the telephone company? Why put in your own fiber optics when you use the telephone companies? Why put in your own microwave when you can use the utilities? So there's ways to build this. But part of the reason why FirstNet was created was a private hardened service that public safety folks can use without having to deal with the limitations of the commercial carriers. And again, they've had 11 years to build this thing and they still have it. Next, please. This basically goes into you know, the limitations. Again, low rate. Very few folks have broadband capabilities out into the field. It's really important or very difficult to support mobile data networks, video, and transferring the files from the car and databases and all that. You know that. I mean, we've gotten to a point where we're almost dependent on the internet, but we don't have that. And again, a lot of agencies have connectivity through commercial providers, which allows them to have access to the net. But you know, these things get congested, and when you start looking at the price of what these services cost, it's astronomical. Next slide, please. On a per month for public safety to use. So going through, you know, the benefits of FirstNet is, again, equipment that's standardized, devices that will come out that aren't vendor specific. It's going to have the ability to do roaming. So if you have public safety workers that are responding to an incident in the Gulf, or there's an incident up here like the train wreck, you're going to have the ability for public safety folks to use the same devices they have in their city in the guest city that they're going. And that's really a kind of a cool thing, is that no matter where you go, you're going to be able to be connected to the public safety network in the areas that you're responding. And what makes this even, I think, even awesomer is the fact that eventually, once the wireless network's in place and you all have your broadband, it's all public safety usage, is you're going to be able to create these apps that really help make your job easier. But one app can be created that not only can be used in this city, but they can be used in every city across the U.S. I mean, that's neat stuff. So all the stuff you got on your cell phone right now, personal use, I mean, it's about time that sort of stuff starts coming to the first and secondary responder world. We've talked a little bit about the wide variety of applications that we'll be able to use. And when we talk low latency, we're talking in milliseconds. So this is going to be quick, it's going to have prioritization of service, it's going to have quality of service. The biggest struggle that we're going to have in this situation is that once a network's built, is who's going to maintain the towers, who's going to maintain the, who's going to put new equipment up. And that's where these public-private partnerships need to come into place with your utilities, with your telephone companies. And 4G, as you know, is much faster than 3G, even though, out here, and I've learned a lot over the last year being out here, is data, it's hard to even get a cell phone, make a phone call. Anyway, so in this case, much faster than 3G, so that's kind of like a duh, no kidding. Anyways, go on, next. From a cost benefit, being able to use all IP is going to internet protocol technology. Data is much more cost effective. Having a private network is more economically feasible as far as expanding and offering services. And this is going to really complement your radio systems. Your LMR systems will work nice with the FirstNet LTE network. But again, eventually you're going to start seeing a migration to more devices that are voice over IP, video, and so forth. And as far as as far as encryption and hardening and all this sort of stuff, if law enforcement is involved in it and partnering with your utilities and so forth, you're talking about a network that's not only going to be secure, but in a time of emergency, you have a dedicated network specifically for yourself that no one else is going to share. And that's a problem that the carriers are going to have to face, is that the carriers are kind of saying right now, AT&T and Verizon, FirstNet, don't build your own private network, use our network. Well, okay, great. If we use your network, we're right back to square one, except you got the spectrum for free. Now you're using it for your own personal uses. In a time of emergency, how are you going to provide me a signal? Are you going to turn off all your customers and now public safety are going to be the only ones that get it? Of course not, because that goes against the service level agreements. But having your own network, you're not going to have those problems anymore, and you are in control of your destiny. And if we have anything to say with this, we're going to get a piece of that $135 million, if not more. You may not want this right now. You may think this is another government program, but you know what? Tri-County believes in this thing, your telephone company does this thing, and we're going to fight for you guys. This isn't going to cost you guys a dime. So this isn't like one of these things where we're going to sit down and say, okay, we're going to go fight for this, and this is your price tag to pay into this. Tri-County is doing this on their own dime because they want to improve the quality of life for their customers. And we're going to fight to get this thing done, because you know what? If we can use you guys as the model for the U.S., we've solved our problems across the country, and if not now, then when? So move on, please. Going back to the opt-in process, that's what's happening right now. The RFPs from FirstNet have not been released. There's a lot of speculation what's going to be in that request for proposal, and when that proposal goes out, or that RFP, the states are going to say, I want to opt in and I want to opt out. We have a small group here, but you guys have teams of people that are used to writing grants. They're actively involved in the state. They're actively involved in the region. There's a lot of different people that can be involved, and what we need to do is we need to start kind of connecting with our networks to start getting everyone on the same page, because this is really a big deal. Again, this is just not one of those programs that we're just doing it for the sake of doing it. Once the RFP comes out, and some are speculating the RFPs are going to come out within the next 2 months, there's going to be about 180 days that we need to inform FirstNet if the state is going to be actively involved. And I'll get into what we need to do now to make sure that we all get involved. There's a lot of times we're really ahead of schedule here. But the big thing right now, can my state opt in or opt out? And it's not going to be the state making this decision all by themselves. They might want to think so, but if we come to the table and say, listen, we represent the Panhandle law enforcement community, the utility, the telephone company, and we want to help you make the business case. We want to understand what assets we have. We want to tell you what our needs are. The state's going to listen, versus not getting involved and nothing happening at all. Next slide, please. This network will be permitted to generate revenues. So if we build this out for law enforcement and secondary users like the utility, we're going to be able to charge different state, federal, and local agencies for the use of this. If the telephone equipment or fiber is used by Panhandle Telephone for the network, for the new LTE network, they're going to be able to get money from the federal government because they're allowing their infrastructure to be used, just like with Tri-County. They're building up this network, they want to make it available to the state, so this thing can generate revenue, and it's important, and those revenues are going to be generated from these various public-private partnerships. But the revenues to be generated from this thing will help pay for new equipment to go out into the field that you guys may want or need. Next slide, please. So this is going to be a term as we move forward that we're going to help guide this process, is the development of a P3, which is a public-private partnership. And these public-private partnerships need to happen on a couple of different levels. There's the state partnerships that need to be made, or the state partnership with the local agencies. And then there's public-private partnerships that need to happen on a local level with the state. That kind of sounds like the same thing, but it's not. So right now we're in the process of creating a public-private partnership. Tri-County and Panhandle Telephone just had a meeting yesterday to figure out how can we work together, how can we go to the state. But that P3 is going to consist of law enforcement, fire, transportation, emergency management, all of you guys. And then in that P3 agreement, we're going to not only agree to work with each other, but we're all going to bring our needs and how those needs work together. How are we going to govern the network? How are we going to provide a service level agreement to each other? How are we going to make sure that this network fails? There's redundancy. How are we going to migrate our old systems to the new systems? So right now, we're investing at Tri-County right now. We have a subject matter expert that is creating a P3 model that's tied into a business case, into financials. So we're in the process of doing this right now from a local level. But again, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and you guys are at the table as we attempt to get this FORCE OK group off the ground. Next slide, please. What can FirstNet accomplish? For me, I really believe that the #1 thing that we're going to be able to do here is not only provide an all-IP data network that's extremely fast, we're going to really be able to provide a prioritization service, a hardened network that's secured, that's always up and is there for your needs. So you can go to the next slide here. So what's next? So the state right now they're putting together like a FirstNet coordinator, and there's the CIO of the state of Oklahoma, who has been told by the governor to start investigating how to put FirstNet, get it going across the state. And then there's a coordinator for that who's like a project manager. And it's his job to build the business case on how this network's going to work across the state, what assets are available, what organizations beyond the who's who that's normally at the table, what organizations can we partner with. And in that is obviously trying to show that what we're attempting to build as the state of Oklahoma, that complies to the FirstNet goals, which goes back to those user requirements. And right now what we're doing at Tri-County is we're already knocking on the doors of other cooperatives in New Mexico and Texas, eventually in Kansas. So Tri-County wants to be the poster child on how FirstNet can be built with cooperatives participating. So we're using what we're building for them as kind of a model. So they've taken on the responsibility of expanding beyond the state to other cooperatives, and we'll be doing that in time. But Panhandle Telephone is in the same position to be in a leadership role and to knock on other cooperatives' doors that are telephone companies, because you've got a very progressive utility and a very progressive telephone company all in the same backyard, but it's not that case across a lot of these rural states. So expansion into other states is important and is something that we foresee doing it. I know that Ron is involved in a number of different groups in DC. On the federal level, Zach and I have become more actively involved in these interoperable planning meetings and groups. So we're out there uncovering things that need to be brought to the group here. And so we're bringing this all together. And right here is a big piece too, is really what assets exist right now, and how do we bring those assets together from towers to fiber, and then most importantly, what you are all going to need to really be focused on is the tactical interoperable communication plans for your local area, how that ties into the state, and how that ties into the federal government. Next slide, please. So FirstNet coordination, so the $135 million that's going to come down through the states right now is for the hiring of staff and consultants for the required planning process. Holding meetings, so we're doing exactly what FirstNet is telling us to do, is have planning meetings with state agencies, local and tribal stakeholders, and regional partners. So Tri-County and us see a lot more meetings that we're going to be conducting across the state, as well as on the federal level, just identifying more stakeholders and then bringing them to the Force OK group. Helping the travel costs are reimbursable, so if you guys need to go to FirstNet meetings, wherever it may be, these are things that the FirstNet is saying that they're going to reimburse us for. There's the conducting of communications and educations and outreach activities. So not only do we need to bring the law enforcement and secondary responder community together, we're going to need to also explain how this is going to work with other community stakeholders like healthcare, oil and gas, education, and so forth. Developing the standardized MOUs we talked about a little earlier. Identifying potential public safety users for the network and various administrative services. So according to the NTIA, which created FirstNet, the Department of Commerce, this is what the next steps are for us to be conducting. Next slide, please. So how are we going to do this here? Zach and I thought it would be important to kick this thing off today because of the significance of what today represents. Some of the discussions we need to have is we need to put a board together, we need to have an actual organization, and then with an agenda of items, bringing in certain subject matter experts, people from the state, from the federal government to talk to us, determine who is going to take the lead in developing the public safety broadband strategy on a local level that ties into the governor's office. Again, working with these various federal and state entities to understand what the requirements are going to be and what we need to do. So right now, where we're at is the recruitment of force primary and secondary responders to serve. The board, it will be an open group. We believe it's important that the board be comprised of primary and secondary emergency responders. And then once we get this piece in place, then we need to ensure a central point of contact in the group as far as how are we going to represent ourselves and go out to the greater community. So it's kind of like where we are right now and wanting to just educate you about what's going on and really what the next steps are. Next slide, please. So that's what's going on. It's exciting to be working on this project with Tri-County. They're passionate about this, improving quality of life. So this is just really important for you guys. It's cool to see the communications being upgraded like this. So there's a lot of work to do. It's just a matter of, who do we want to bring in to this working group? How do we want to stand up an organization? How often do we want to meet? You guys, Daryl, you're involved in a lot with the emergency management guys across the team. So, you try to get us into a show for us to present. How can we do that on a greater level? How can the telephone company and us all work together? How can the different cities work together? Having with some of the other sheriff's departments, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And we're willing to take the role